Hey, this is Avi Gutman with another Ask Me Anything event brought to you by quantreasoning.com. I invite you to join me live next time. We do this every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and you can attend for free by starting your free trial at quantreasoning.com. So this one starts with the word despite, also not underlined. Do we know what to expect from a sentence that starts with the word despite? There's a particular structure that goes with it. So the meaning will give us some kind of contrast, that's correct. There will be a comma at some point, all right? Despite so-and-so, despite x, comma, y. But what can we expect of x and y from a structural perspective? Y will be a clause, x will not be a clause. On the other hand, just to give you a counter example, a sentence that starts with the word although, right? There, x will be a clause and y will also be a clause. But when you're starting with despite, x won't be a clause, y will be a clause. So that's an important difference between despite and although, because the meaning of despite and although is actually very similar. They're almost identical in meaning, but they require a different structure. You know me, I'm not a huge fan of memorizing anything, and obviously the first time I took the GMAT, I knew absolutely zero about grammar. So I had nothing memorized and still did okay. So it is possible to do well without memorizing a single thing, but if you are going to be memorizing stuff for sentence correction, yeah, this is a good one to memorize.
Can you explain what a clause is in this context?
Yeah, a clause is just something that could stand alone as a sentence, something that has a subject and a verb and could stand alone as a complete sentence. So as an example of something that's not a clause, this is not a clause, right? Now you might say, wait a minute, why is it not a clause? It has a subject, the dog, it has a verb, bit. What's the problem? Why is this not a clause? The answer is it's not a clause because of the word that. The word that introduces a modifier describing which dog we're talking about, meaning bit is not a verb. Bit is just telling me which dog I'm referring to, and I'm still expecting to get a verb afterwards. So there are two ways to turn it into a clause. One way to turn it into a clause is to remove the word that. Now it's a clause because it could stand alone as a sentence. This is a complete sentence. Another way to fix it is to add a verb at the end. For example, the dog that bit me is vicious. Now it's a clause. Despite increases, analysts expect automakers, highlight that as well. Let's just ignore the stuff in between the commas because I don't see how that's going to be helpful to us. And let me also block off the other stuff. I just don't see how it's useful, why any of this is needed. So despite increases, comma, let's leave the comma because that's structural. There we go. Okay, despite increases, comma, analysts expect automakers to set dividends more conservatively than they were. Are there any comparison rules that we need to use here? Because we do have a comparison marker. Something is more than something else. What are some comparison rules that we know? Is parallelism required in comparisons? Do comparisons need to be logical to compare apples to apples? They're definitely both clauses because after the word than we have subject verb, they were. What was the subject of the first clause? Yeah, because there's only one verb before the word more, and that's expect. And the subject for expect is analysts. So they has to refer to analysts just by the rules of comparisons. Right? Because you've got clause more than clause. We are comparing clause to clause. So analysts expect more than the analysts were expecting. And does that make logical sense that this is referring to analysts were expecting? Is that what the author intended to convey? That the analysts expect automakers to set dividends more conservatively than analysts were expecting. I just constructed an analogous sentence, okay? And now I'll explain the comparison rule. So when you're comparing two things, those two things have to be logically comparable. If the thing after the more than is a clause, subject verb, they were, that has to be compared to a clause from before more than, And the only clause we had was analysts expect. So the they were has to be something that's being compared to analysts expect. I think the fact that we can't all agree on what this comparison is actually attempting to compare is instructive, right? That probably means that this is wrong. If you think about the purpose of this sentence, like what is a sensible interpretation of this sentence? Who's the one setting the dividends? Automakers. And that's also what Eric was saying. Like, how is it not the automakers that the they is referring to? And you're right, it should, but it doesn't when you look at comparison rules. But I'm pretty sure the author intended to say that, yes, the automakers, the analysts expect the automakers to set dividends more conservatively than the automakers set them in the past. That's what the author tried to say here, but A doesn't work because of this comparison, because they were needs to work with a clause prior to more than, and the clause is analysts expect, and that's why it's wrong. Can we all eliminate D and E? Because it doesn't make sense to say analysts expect automakers that they will be more conservative?
Yep.
Yes.
So we're down to two answer choices, B or C.
B has the same problem as A, doesn't it? You're just changing the tense of the verb tense. They have been to they were, but it's still.
Yeah, so it'd be then they, the analysts, have been expecting, right? Then
Yeah. Well, C balances the comparison to B than they have been.
Good, I think we're done. All right, the analysts expect automakers to set dividends, or analysts expect automakers to be more conservative in setting dividends. So JD, what you're saying is the reason C succeeds where A and B failed is thanks to this here, that green highlight at the end. It removes any doubt. That's what it does. If you found this video useful, go to quantreasoning.com for a lot more where that came from. You should also click that like button and let me know in the comments below what you'd like me to make future videos about. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and do that and click that bell below so you get notified about future videos. See you next time.